Hey everybody, today I'm excited to chat with Sarah and Mike of Hot Plate Brewing Company, the sole Latina-owned independent brewery in Massachusetts. We're going to dive into their adventure, their values, and how they are helping make breweries more accessible. But first, let's meet our guest. Sarah and Mike, if you had to describe yourself in 10 words or less, what would those words be? And Mike, I know you're pretty good with the words, so I'm going to have you go first so Sarah has a little more time to prep.
That sounds fine. Already packaged for me. In graduate school, I had a professor who described me as a mouse who hasn't been fed enough cheese, and that's probably the best description of me there is, I think.
You got to give us a little more background on that. A mouse who hasn't been fed enough cheese. Explain.
Yeah, I think it's just because I'm always just a little too intense, a little too eager, and just kind of like going a mile a minute, And so I think I try to come from a good place. It tries to be positive intent, but um, I am a pretty intense person. So.
To me, those sound like great qualities. I'm always go, 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 and I think we get along really well.
Awesome.
Sarah, your turn.
It's again just our different trains of thought. I was going for like, what are 10 adjectives? And I was like, oh, you mean a sentence? So I am unapologetically myself. That describes me, for better or for worse.
No, I love it. Well, you could have went either way. I've been fine with 10 adjectives. I've been fine with the sentence. I don't like to frame it. I just want to see where you take it.
Yeah, because I was like, a little zany, kaleidoscopic, OCD, but I think unapologetically myself covers it.
I like it. And right now you are wearing bright red glasses, which I love. Is that a color that's become like a staple for you, or how did you end up, wearing something like that?
It inadvertently has. I have terrible vision. And so it has been, if I have to be wearing glasses, I might as well have some fun with it. And so I used to have this blue pair that I love dearly, lost them in a Brooklyn bar somewhere. And so these became me. And so, and it's a dated reference, but I'm always like Sally Jesse Raphael could, pull them off. So
no, I like them. It's a good image. So we've already mentioned you two run a brewery together. We're going to get to that shortly, but I'd love to take a step back for a second and learn, how did you two first meet?
We met in college. We worked at a place called the Student Bookstore at Penn State. And we met actually working in the math aisle of that bookstore, which is funny to me because I'm terrible at math. But we were a couple different years apart, and so we worked together. We became friends, and we actually didn't start dating for about a year and a half, and then started dating toward the end of Sarah's time at Penn State, and we've been together ever since.
And that was Penn State. Where was home originally, Mike?
For me, I was born in New Jersey and actually moved to State College, Pennsylvania. So I was a townie in college. And Sarah actually is a more exciting thing.
Yeah, I was born in LA County, moved to New Hampshire when I was 8 because my mom wanted to see trees. So, and then off to Penn State for college.
So we need to pause at that move from LA to New Hampshire moment right there, because that really interests me. I mean, I love trees too, and we have a lot of beautiful places with trees in the United States. But why New Hampshire?
I know my mom always wanted to be part of New England. I don't know why, and I'm half Mexican, and so it was very challenging moving to New Hampshire in the early 90s and not being white. So it taught me a lot, but I really enjoy New England. And it's funny because my sister always is like, I'm a California girl. And I thought I was, and we moved there for a year. I was like, no, I'm not. I am East Coast all the way. So
no, I'm East Coast and I love it. And I visited New Hampshire for the first time in December of 2022. And it was everything I've seen in the movies. It was like a perfect small New England quaint town. Like, where were you in New Hampshire?
So I was right on the seacoast, in the Stratham, Exeter area, Portsmouth. So I went to the public Exeter High School. And then going to Penn State, a lot of people thought I had this amazing pedigree of Phillips Exeter and then Penn. And I just let people believe that. It's fine.
No, sorry, the light just got turned off on me. One of our employees accidentally turned off the light. I'm going to be right back. I'm so sorry about that.
You're all good. So Sarah, I'd like to dive a little bit more into your time in New Hampshire, because this is neat. I mean, you mentioned, you were in the minority growing up in New Hampshire. What did you learn from those experiences? How did it shape who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, at first I didn't understand that I was quote unquote different. that I looked different. I was just like, I'm a human being. This is what I am. And, coming from LA, we had all different walks of life. So it was, I didn't really understand. And then looking back on a lot, again, I've always been unapologetically myself. So my first day of second grade in new school, I asked my parents if I could get 2 different pairs of Converse, one pink and one blue, so that I could be like Punky Brewster. And so apparently, and I know this because it's someone who's now my stepbrother, we're in the same grade. He apparently came home that day and said to his mom, there's a new girl at school and she's kind of weird. She wore 2 different colored sneakers. And that was just me. I was like, this is how I'm going to go to school. This is it. This is what I want to do. So it was different. And, my parents actually opened a Mexican restaurant there. So that was interesting to see. It taught me a lot. 1, I never want to run a restaurant. 2, really what it is to run a small business. In as much as I could understand just, in junior high and high school, running a small business in a small community, what that means, the burdens, the benefits, all of that. But I love it. I mean, luckily we lived near the beach, even though, the beach is only really like 25 miles long. But it was nice. I enjoyed it, and super active in sports. So, once you do sports, that's kind of an automatic in for people and making friends.
As soon as you said 2 Converses, when I was in high school, I did the exact same thing. I had one red, one black, and I would wear, a high white sock on one with red stripe, black sock on the other one. So
perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
It's fun. It's a little character. It's the little things that make a big difference. And
yes,
working in the restaurant, growing up with your family, is there any task that you absolutely did not enjoy?
I don't think so. I really love monotonous tasks. So anytime it was, filling the little salsa cups for the chips and salsa or doing this, I'm very like, you just can put me to work grating like pounds and pounds of cheese. Just put me in a kitchen, put me somewhere, and I'm happy doing monotonous tasks. So I think just like cleaning the bathrooms. I never liked that. That was
Mike, are you a pro at cleaning bathrooms? Is that where you fit into the picture?
That is one of my chores at home, yes. But there are pictures of Sarah like frying food at like 6 years old. Like she was definitely like doing things that you probably shouldn't have been doing when you were a kid. But yeah, I handle the dirty work. I don't mind it as much as Sarah does. So I did to chip in there. She's definitely a fantastic cook as a result of, cooking since she was 6. So I do most of the cleaning, and then I just reap the benefits of having delicious food. So
sounds like a win. So you both went to Penn State. When did beer become part of your life?
Well, growing up in State College, beer became part of my life, I think, before it should have legally. But we always kind of tell people that having gone to a party school like Penn State, you drink a lot of bad beer before you start drinking beer. But the one thing that we were lucky about was there was a bar in college called Zeno's, and they used to have this passport. I think they might still. That was like around the world in 80 beers, where it was like a club of beers from like Belgium and England and all this other stuff. And so Sarah, I'll kick it over to her, but she actually endeavored to complete this passport.
Yeah, because it was after you got your 80 beers, you got your name on a plaque on the wall and a t-shirt. And I'm extremely competitive with myself, with others. So I said challenge accepted. But there were, because I didn't know, I was just like, oh, this is the next one. I look back now, I'm like, I had a lot of amazing beers that I did not appreciate, but also not appreciate them was I would have one sip and go, oh, I don't like this. Mike, have it. So he co-owns this t-shirt with me that I never wear because it's so precious to me. It's the most expensive shirt basically I own because of all the money I spent on the beer. But it taught me, like it really, really taught me a lot, whether it was something on tap, why is the bottle this way? What does it mean to pour it out of a bottle? All these things that, next time I go back, I can't wait to actually go to that bar. And I really appreciate it. But that was where I started to learn a little bit. My family has always been drinking beer. And in fact, my grandmother, she used to do Aztec dancing because we're part Aztec. And my grandfather drank so much and they didn't have enough money. So she would actually take the beer pull tabs and she would use that on her costumes that she made rather than sequins. So I always remember growing up of like these gorgeous costumes that she had. And I was like, oh, those are soda caps. It didn't occur to me where they came from, how they got there, and things like that. So beer's kind of always been part of my life in one way or another.
As part of the experience at Zeno's, you said it was 80 beers or was it 180 beers?
80.
Did you have to have a full pint of each?
You had to, yes, you had to have, yeah, it wasn't like you could do a flight or something. You had to have either a full pint, a full bottle, and some of them were kind of larger formats, smaller formats, of course, stronger ones. You're doing the 8 or 10 ounces, but yes, you couldn't just, take a little sip and get it checked off.
The thing was like, we started, we didn't have, when Sarah was saying we were learning this stuff, it's like we were exposed to it, but we certainly didn't, I think, understand everything. But we started to understand, I think, or see that we had different palates, because that was like the first time I had like a Sam Smith oatmeal stout. And I was like, oh, I like that. That was one that, handed off to me, because I think it's only been a more recent thing that she's really been finding dark beers that she likes. But that, that end of the spectrum was not something that initially appealed to her. And so we started understanding like, oh, we both like this. You like a lambic, I don't really like a lambic. And so we could start to understand in the sort of full spectrum of beer, what are sort of Mike beers, what are sort of Sarah beers, and where are the moments of overlap. And the other thing that was kind of interesting as I think back on it, this was also just in the sort of nascence of the craft beer boom. So like my roommate and I, we used to cut out just the 6-packs when they were still sold in bottles. And like the 6-pack labels in our kitchen wall, we would just put up the art from like each new 6-pack that we tried. And, back then it was like Red Hook and Dogfish Head and, Sierra Nevada, and like some of them are legacy brands now. But for us, it was really interesting because you're drinking so much domestic light lagers at like a keg party because that's what you can afford. But then when it was just like the two of us, watching a movie on a Saturday, we might get like a more expensive 6-pack. And that's when we started realizing like ales were bigger bodied, hops were, way more bitter. And, I definitely got into that sort of IBU war craze of like the early 2000s because it was so different from like Natty Light that it was pleasant and it was surprising and interesting. So I think I started getting into the craft beer world while Sarah was way more interested in the sort of like European continental, beer world. And we started kind of going down these two different paths as a result.
Are there any beers from that time that really just stand out as, being influential for you?
For me, it was Stone Arrogant Bastard. I do remember like when I drank that, I was like, oh, this is like super different than everything else I've ever drank. And that became, I always tell people like that was my quote unquote gateway beer of like, after I had that, I was like, oh, I really want to try all these other beers and see what this is all about.
The Lindemann Lambics. I had no idea what I was drinking, but I was like, oh, I really like these. And again, it was that kind of introductory because they aren't too tart for, if you're going that Belgian style or a Berliner Weiss, that it's a little more approachable. And I really enjoy that. And now it has a lower ABV. There are different, flavors and you can understand. I love Belgian beer. So understanding those things a little bit more, that's kind of when I knew something was different. Also, admittedly, Blue Moon was kind of my entry into like, oh, beer can be different. And then it was, okay, what is the style? And so that was also a gateway for me.
The Lindemans are a great set of beers there. I picked up a 4-pack recently. They had like mini bottles. It's the best way I can describe them. They were like 10-ounce bottles of just 4 different variants. And there was the cutest packaging. I'm not going to get up and grab it right now, but I'll show you after because it was just like, this is a good drinking experience.
That sounds awesome. Yeah.
So you went to school. You actually learned a ton about beer in the meantime. But what did you actually go to school for?
So I did my master's at Penn State as well. So my undergrad is telecommunications, and then my master's is contemporary First Amendment theory. So very useful for like one trivia question, once a month or something.
As one does when they eventually open up a brewery, learn about the First Amendment. Mine was in English. I wanted to be, I still write fiction, but I thought that I would end up, in academia, teaching literature, teaching writing. Turns out that wasn't like a super lucrative path to go down. So didn't end up going down that route, but I'm definitely still very much a literary nerd these days.
So you go to school, you learn beer, you have your careers, at what point did you get more into beer where you started to think about it as not something you just enjoyed to drink on a Saturday afternoon, but something that was becoming a greater part of your life?
Well, I had wanted to kind of get into the industry right after I graduated. And we were driving cross country and it stopped at New Belgium. And I really loved what was going on there. Again, I had no idea what it meant to run a brewery. I had no idea what brewing really was. I just knew the end product. But then, we're like, oh, Mike was like, we should use our degrees we just earned. But anytime,
So logical, Mike.
I know that once he was so logical.
Yeah, I was gonna say very, very out of character, but for once I was actually like level-headed.
Yeah, so that's when we were moving out to California for a year, and we didn't have any friends out there, so we just started going to breweries and going to Escondido to see Stone and all of that, and then. I was traveling a lot for work, and it's lonely being on the road, whether internationally was really where I was going. And so a lot of times when I didn't know the language, it was just, okay, I'm going to go have beer. I know the language of beer. So that's where I kind of learned a lot of the more and leaned into more of the malt forward styles and the crisp, clean lagers. And so that's when I was like, and this is great. Understand like, oh, people do this. People have businesses. This isn't just a hobby for some people.
So when you were doing all these international trips, are there any destinations that really had a strong beer culture that influenced you?
I mean, London, obviously. My boss for some time was based in London, so I'd go out there the most frequent. Obviously, heading out to Berlin was, again, great, just a great education in what a crisp beer is. Mike and I love to travel, so going to Belgium was just mind blowing. And anytime we could, everybody's like, "Oh, you love traveling." What are some great restaurants? And I just pull up like the saved stuff on my Google Maps. I'm like, I only have breweries or tap rooms. Like I can't.
Like, what did we eat while we were there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
That was often the case, and one of the things, and this is, maybe skipping a little bit in the narrative, when we started homebrewing, we were still like, making mostly like American and English style ales. And then after we went to Belgium for the first time, it really was like, that moment, like when the Beatles took LSD and then you get Revolver, it was like, oh my God, like beer can also be all of these things too. And then we started really getting like hooked on making saisons, hooked on making, like our Golden Strong Ale that we have on tap now. And like, we just really loved the complexity you get just from the yeast strains alone that are cultivated in Belgium. And the other thing that we realized too was that the Belgian sort of brewing philosophy really clicked for Sarah in a way that, as we were getting ourselves educated to just the like world and landscape of beer, what we were finding out was that I at one point used to do brewing as well. And my brewing attitude was very sort of like German Reinheitsgebot driven. I'm like, no, it's got to be these 4 ingredients. And I was very boring. It's funny, for being a creative person, I was very boring as a brewer because it was like, okay, this is a true to style porter. This is a true to style, pale ale. And Sarah was always like, well, what if we tinker with this? What if we tinker with that? And when we realized that Belgian credo, that if it tastes good, it is good, was sort of the way that they approach this, we realized that like that really resonated with Sarah, who, her whole life cooking and baking and learning how to put different ingredients together. And I started realizing like, wow, she really does have a point of view. All I'm doing is kind of recreating these things and being very proud that I can make a like serviceable beer. For Sarah, this was expression. And I think that's why Belgium, I think, made such an impact for us, because it really helped us find a way forward as a team, and Sarah as a brewer, to like really embrace the fact that she wanted to try new things and push boundaries and not be so bound by, you can only have water, malt, hops, and yeast, and that's it. And for me, I took a back seat and said, you know what, like you have a point of view, you have a vision of like what you want to make. I like to run my mouth and I like to tell stories, and maybe that's how we can figure out how we do this together.
So Sarah, when you started putting more unique ingredients in beer, were there any ingredients that really stand out as the first ones you wanted to experiment with?
Yeah, so it was chamomile was the first one, because I love chamomile, and it was just, oh, well, again, for me, I'm just like, well, let's just throw it in there, see what happens. And I just remember Mike being like, well, how much? I'm like, oh, we'll just see. And especially starting with something like chamomile, like you have to put a lot in there to have too much, not starting on like a habanero or something. So it was, starting with that. I finally lived my dream this past week of releasing a small batch beer with bergamot in it. And so that was Mike learned he does not like bergamot. So that's great to know. But it is, I love it. It's very aromatic, kind of dissipates quickly. But Mike took a sip and said it tastes like soap. And so I said, okay, wait, we have different thoughts on this one.
I'll agree with Mark on that one. It's not one of my favorite flavors, but I'll try it.
The chamomile one was an interesting moment too, because that was a time when we were still home brewing, and like I said, we hadn't quite yet figured out like Sarah's going to take the lead on recipe design, and I remember having an argument about this beer because there was this women's homebrew showcase. This is when we were still living in Brooklyn and home brewing, and Sarah wanted to make this chamomile blonde ale for the showcase, and I was just like, that is too weird. That's too different. Like, you're not going to be able to show your real skill as a brewer if you make this like super weird recipe. So we go, and Sarah actually had to be out of town for the event itself. So one of our friends subbed in and poured for us, and I was also there. And all these people kept coming back to the table like, oh my God, who made this? I've never had anything like it. And I was like so wrong in such a like beautiful way, because it was just like over and over, you know, we were just getting like compliments for this. But the marketer in me, the light bulb went off in my head, and I was just like, not only was this a really interesting and unique recipe, but one of the things we noticed was that, and this is just the reality, I hate that it's true, but it was a very sort of gendered thing where all these women were like, oh my God, I really like this. And so when we started making this batch every so often as homebrewers, we used to have tasting parties at our place in the pre-COVID times, and we'd have this over. And what normally happened is like the husband, and again, unfortunately, this was very gendered at the time, but the husbands would like drink the beer and the wives would like take a sip and be like, you know, they'd be polite and then switch to wine. And when we had this chamomile blonde, all of a sudden it was like all these people started saying like, I don't like beer, but I would drink this. And we started, and you know, to this day, we still get a lot of people through our tap room where they'll have Sarah's beer and they tell us like, I don't normally like beer, but like this recipe or that recipe appeals to me. And so to this day, like, the Capable of Anything chamomile blonde ale is still one of our best beers, and it wouldn't have existed if I had gotten my way. So there you go on recipe design.
That's a good story there. So where in the world were you two when you first got into homebrewing?
Sarah was in Europe when we first got into homebrewing. So I was, it was something we had always talked about, but like Sarah said, we didn't really know anything about brewing itself. Like we loved beer. It was a passion for both of us. And one of my coworkers at the time was also a home brewer in Brooklyn. And I really didn't think that you could homebrew in a tiny little apartment in New York. I mean, we had a 600 square foot place. When you go to like a craft brewery, you see these huge, you know, mash tuns and hot liquor tanks and, you know, fermentation vessels. And I didn't realize you could also brew at like a 1 gallon scale. So I got one of those kits and just start following the recipe. And so I actually got into it first, just because Sarah was on the road. Usually about like 1 week out of a month, she would be gone. And so it was just a nice hobby. And I literally had no other ambitions than like, maybe I can make a passable beer that I can drink and share with my friends. And then when Sarah like got into it and she started like really wanting to learn, Sarah being more diligent and more studious was like, well, let me take classes. Let me learn more about this. And because I always was just kind of winging it, which, you know, I got mixed results.
Sarah, did you secretly want to make it a competition and make the better beer?
Oh, of course.
Well, she won that very quickly. I mean, it was clear from the set that she was better at this. And then, you know, once she started designing her own recipes, like I said, that was where it started to really take off. I still, you know, when we were homebrewing, I would still make a recipe every so often. Like I remember during COVID, I was getting really nostalgic for West Coast IPAs because the market was flooded with New England's. And so, you know, I was just like, okay, let me write a recipe for the beer I want to drink. And I'm still like sort of capable of doing that. But in terms of making something interesting, you know, that's definitely Sarah's realm. Mine is very much like, you know, sticking with a more conservative approach.
But I think also for us, because we do like hanging out with each other, it was something that we could do together, you know, because he has writing that he does on the side. You know, I love cooking and baking, so that we didn't have a lot that we did together. In terms of creating things, we drank a lot together. But it was nice because it could be something, hey, let's talk, you know, it wasn't just the brewing day. It was, let's talk about the recipe. Let's go to the homebrew store together, gather the ingredients. And it was kind of something nice that we could do together that wasn't just like going out to dinner or something.
And then one of the things we realized too was like, you know, on brew days, this was back when we were still at home. I would like make the playlist for the day, and we put on some vinyl records. And I definitely had way more interest in creating the context for these things and like naming the beers, and and honestly to this day, like that's what I kind of do still for Hot Plate, where it's like creating moments and creating the theming these tasting parties we used to have, like all this other stuff, like help other people share the love for the beer. But like Sarah said, we just realized like this could be a creative process for both of us. It's just, it would be the one more often not doing the actual recipe design. Nowadays, she does all the brewing herself because I'm too much of a pain in the ass when when I'm in the brew house. So she had to kick me out.
Well, Mike, I'll let you shine again for just a second. You mentioned you did themed parties when you did the beer releases at your house.
Yeah, we'd like, have different snacks or different music or different things. They've taken on a new form now that we have a commercial tap room, but we've always tried to understand that not everyone wants to nerd out about beer in the same way that Sarah and I do. So even before we started a business, and it's definitely lived on through our commercial enterprise, is how do we give other people points of access that, for them, they don't care about the different styles. And so if it's a Belgian beer, trying to like create some context for people to understand what that's like, or an English beer and trying to create some context for that. So is the playlist all going to be like British rock bands from the 60s night, or, just something to kind of like celebrate what went on into that beer so that people can at least get the vibe, even if they don't want to like go deep about it.
No, I like it. So we have to dive into this now. Where in the world did your beer name come from? Not your beer name, your brewery name come from?
Mike can wax poetic about this one. When I finally barged through the door one day after having drinks with some friends, I declared that we were going to open a brewery. Because it was
like,
just
how serious were you on that one, Sarah?
I mean, it was I joined a book club. I'm not a huge fan of fiction, much to the chagrin of Mike. I like nonfiction. I like facts. And so I joined a book club, and we just met at a beer hall in Brooklyn, and we just ended up chatting, drinking, and it was like, go around and everybody say, if money were no object, what would you do? And start a brewery is what came out of my mouth. So I'm like, oh, that's been rattling around in there for, some odd years. And so I declared that we were doing this and started taking classes and all of that. But kind of around that same time that I realized my dream, coming out of my mouth, we had a code violation in the condo that we were living in Brooklyn. And so the gas got shut off to our building. So we didn't have heat, we didn't have hot water, and we couldn't cook on our gas stove. And that went on we lived through it for about 3.5 years. It went on.
Wait, you didn't have hot water for 3.5 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
How did you shower? Oh my God.
We were fit as fuck because we'd go to the gym every day to shower. So
yeah.
So when COVID hit, we went back to like a camp, like heating up a tea kettle, doing a camp shower, like in our, it was not great. But I wasn't going to kind of put this off anymore. So I got a hot plate and like a classic, Cuisinart hot plate. Cause we obviously had to eat, but I was like, I'm just going to do it on this. And it was brutal. I mean, bringing water to anything close to a rolling boil, not even a boil on a hot plate. Brew days were brew days for like a gallon. So it was bad. So for us, it's just our symbol of doing what you can with what you have. And, there are big blocks put in people's ways and you just have to work your way around it. We learned a lot. It symbolizes a lot for us. And we just want to make a welcoming space for people because we had a lot of friends that would allow us to shower at their place or make us a warm dinner. And so we wanted to give that space to other people who might be going through a shitty time, or you're having a great day. You come in and you have done what you did with what you had and it turned out great. So come and celebrate with us.
The other thing too, just to tack onto that. The other thing was that this was supposed to get retrofit. So I was on the condo board, and this is why Sarah usually takes this because I get way too in the weeds of how this all came to be. But it had been a new construction, and the code violation was for an install that was done improperly. So this was supposed to be fixed in just a matter of weeks because the developer was supposed to, fix the issue and get us back to compliance, and we'd have our heat and hot water back. So it wasn't like, we lose our gas, we start brewing on a hot plate, the light bulb goes off and we're suddenly Hot Plate Brewing Company. It was like, this was over the course of, a long period of time. And about a year into living this way, we were starting to get really despondent about the situation we were in. And that was where this dream of starting a brewery became, I think, really palpable for us, because it gave us something to look forward to and work toward while we were going through a difficult time. And so that's why we selected the Hot Plate as sort of a symbol of what we were doing. And so in August 2018, that was when we decided, like, okay, we're really going to call ourselves Hot Plate Brewing Company. And that was actually when we started our Instagram account. Like, our first post is sometime in that time range. It was about a year after we lost our gas. And what has been kind of nice is, you can go back all the way to our first post in August of 2018 and then follow the journey from like 2 people living without heat and hot water all the way to now covering like what's going on in our tap room.
I love that.
And as you'll see, like in the very, very early days, there wasn't a lot of intentionality. It was just sort of like, it was just something to distract from the situation we were in. And then over the course of that journey, we started getting more serious. We started learning more about what was going on in the industry. And we started learning why Sarah felt like maybe she wasn't being reflected in what she was seeing when we were going to breweries, and why she felt like she was a little bit of a misfit sometimes when we were in certain places. And so a lot of what happened sort of like along the way. There was not like this grand moment where like this was all just set forth and it was like fully packaged in our mind. It's just a lot of like early day survival. And like Sarah mentioned, when COVID hit and we were still living in these conditions, it just was like, okay, now is the time to make this move. Now is the time to really go for it. Because, like she mentioned, we were showering at the gym and we were making do. And suddenly when we were trapped, in this apartment that had no heat, hot water, and a functioning stove, and the whole world was shut down around us, we're like, okay, we really now need to do something about this. Like, before we could sort of live through it. And it's like, now it's go time. And so that's what kind of kicked, 2020 was what kind of kicked us into like, we go pro, we've got to get out of here. The nice thing was, if there was ever going to be a time to make a life change, that felt like it was it. And we, got kind of the kick in the rear to really get moving on this.
So what did you do? Because you're in Brooklyn at this time. You're obviously not in Brooklyn anymore. Talk to me about how this all happened.
Well, I mean, like, it gave us the chance, because we were not going out anywhere besides the bar around the corner from us to fill up our growlers. So we had time to write a business plan. We had a time to actually think about what this meant. When we say open a brewery, it's like, great, does anyone really need another brewery? What is it that we can offer? Because beer isn't a new thing. And so what is it that we want to do? And that then had us asking questions and thinking about things.
And
also,
sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was saying, also, we had to think about, well, where would we put this? Because like you might have even been about to mention, like, because it was becoming a maturing market, because there were already these like, markets that were pretty dense, like from 2013 till about 2017, we saw Brooklyn alone blow up and have like 40 new breweries open, in that time span. And so we had to start thinking about, well, where do we feel like there are underserved markets? And so thankfully, because Sarah's day job is as a researcher, we started to apply, just some light market research to just understand, what does that consumer look like? Where do we feel there are geographic areas that maybe are falling below that per capita you would expect to see in terms of, breweries to population. And so that's what started kind of having us look at the Berkshires as a potential target, because we thought we'd end up in upstate New York, just because we used to visit the Catskills and Hudson Valley ourselves. And we found that Berkshire County had a lot of what we liked about upstate New York, but there were only, at the time, 5 breweries in the whole county. And when you looked at their full-time population plus the tourists that passed through, they checked out pretty nicely against the demographics that Sarah was pulling to see who the craft beer consumer was. So that started kind of getting us there. And then one of my fiction writing mentors, so it does actually come back to my English degree, I guess, but one of my fiction writing mentors teaches at Williams College. And so I had actually come up to the Berkshires several times to do like private writing workshops with him, starting in like 2016, 2017. So I had some familiarity with the area. We didn't have any family connections. A lot of people here usually like have family members or they were born and raised here themselves. But we really fell in love with the area, and Downtown Pittsfield reminded us of some of the neighborhoods we lived in the early days of our time in Brooklyn, in terms of like a little bit of an underutilized urban space where there were some vacancies or there were some like really beautiful old buildings that just needed some new life to be breathed into them. And there wasn't a downtown tap room. So for us, we're like, how many small cities or towns are there left in America where there's no brewery downtown? And so we reached out to the city, and they were so enthusiastic about the idea. You know, I emailed the business development guy at the city, called me in 5 minutes. And I was like, well, I've been spending 3 years trying to get New York City to care about our code violation and getting no answers. So, you know, this guy picking up the phone and calling me in 5 minutes means they're probably a pretty nice community. And so we started getting really serious. And then because it was COVID, we were able to take our jobs with us. And that was always going to be the $1 million question of like, how can we make money while we're building a brewery? Because we knew we had to leave Brooklyn, and we are not independently wealthy ourselves. You know, we were living, you know, paycheck to paycheck. So it was like, how could this happen? And the one upside to a really terrible time with the pandemic was that we could take our jobs with us and we could work remotely. And that was a huge part of this. And then we also got super lucky because in 2021, the real estate market was so insane that we were actually able to sell that condo, which never had its gas restored. You know, we were able to actually sell that for like market rate so that we could just get out of there and wash our hands of the situation. So even though the world was kind of on fire in a lot of ways, we were able to kind of navigate that and make a soft landing through a really tricky time. And once those things started hitting, then it was like we just didn't look back, and we just were like, okay, now it's in motion and it's happening, and like we just have to now make this work.
It's so awesome because when I was, learning more about you all before this call, I found the article that the city of Pittsfield did about you, and it's so great to see a municipality want to do this and support breweries in that community. I mean, so that's awesome that they're so proud of you, and it's awesome that they were able to help you, achieve this. As you were dreaming out this brewery at your tap room, what did you envision the tap room to be like when you opened it? Like, so thinking before you actually physically built it out, what was it looking like in your head?
For me, it was this grand, like we'd have this amazing building and land and, where we could have cornhole and the kids are over there and all this different stuff. And then looking at the actual real estate really put everything in perspective. So we knew we didn't have the money to be the first thing in a city that was either trying to get back on its feet or an area that was up and coming. But we also didn't want to be the last thing. And we know the culture of pubs and breweries and what that has meant throughout history and how it is such a central location. It is a public meeting house. I was just watching a special on Discovery about like how booze built America and like going through the American Revolution and what pubs meant to that. So we knew that we wanted to be in a downtown area, and we kept being told, this isn't Brooklyn. I'm like, I know. If it were Brooklyn, I would not be here. I understand that it is no way Brooklyn. There's a reason we left. And so understanding some of the cities and towns, what they had to offer for real estate, what we felt we could do. And because Pittsfield is marked as a gateway city, because GE left a couple of decades ago, really took the city down with it. Building back up, there's money from Massachusett, from City of Pittsfield to help businesses build. And so once we kind of found that out, we're like, okay, well, what do we need? Again, asking, what do we need for X to be true? So I had to take this, I'm going to have this amazing new shiny brewery with all this space and go back to my little, okay, this is how we lived in Brooklyn. But understand that we could still build a space we wanted, because we did end up finding a place that had been remodeled, was a vanilla box. So it's not like we had to rip out existing counters and things like that. It really was terrifyingly so just a white space for us to do what we wanted.
What are the emotions? Sorry, Mike. What are the emotions you all wanted people to feel when they walked in?
I always joke that I want to have a luggage rack at the door, and it's just like, leave your baggage here. I wanted people to have a sense of relief and comfort and safety, most importantly, because if you are going there as a solo person to do work, you just want to be able to sit down, crunch through things, enjoy a beer. If you're going there with friends, no one goes out and be like, I think I want to have an okay time tonight. You say, I want to have the best night ever. I want this to be great. And if it's not the best night ever, well, it's okay that it was an okay time. But I just wanted people to feel unburdened because both Mike and I have gone through our lives with a lot of burdens, whether we've put it on ourselves or whether it's from outside forces. And it's just nice when you can take a few minutes, a few hours, and just unburden yourself with life.
I think the thing that we also wanted to do, and this, when we picked the space that we picked, it had these really tall windows facing the exterior, and it kind of reminded us of the condo we had in Brooklyn, which also had floor to ceiling windows. And so we started having this idea of like, what if it was sort of a bizarro version of our old living room, where we would have these tasting parties. So one of the things that we did to really make it feel welcoming, we brought our old sofa from our condo. We brought our old coffee table. These are now in the tap room. We have 2 bookcases that have, books of mine. We have pictures of us with our friends. We've tried to make it almost feel like you're coming into our living room. And, there's some intentionality behind it, because one of the things we kept seeing was that there were certain tropes, as you know, I mean, anyone who's been to a bunch of breweries, it's like normally a lot of metal and a lot of wood and a lot of concrete and, has that sort of industrial feel to it. And so we were like, if we want to be a more gender neutral, more safe space, what if we had a design and an aesthetic that was slightly different and it felt a little bit more like, one of the things we kept telling our architect is that we wanted it to feel like it was your coolest friend's apartment. And then we also wanted it to be just like fun and quirky. So we have our logo like on the wall, and there's these like racing stripes that go throughout the space, and it like turns into our logo on this feature wall. We mounted the original Hot Plate on the wall.
I was going to ask about that Hot Plate. There's a shrine to it. I love it.
Yeah. So we memorialized the original Hot Plate. We eventually did upgrade to a more powerful one because, like as Sarah said, it was painful to try to brew on like a Cuisinart, just like Hot Plate from Target. But we were able to kind of like honor that this started from us being homebrewers, and we wanted that feeling to feel like that gap between a home brewery and like a commercial brewery wasn't as great. And one of the things we've been able to do actually fairly recently is we've been really making a lot of great connections with the home brewing community here. And Sarah's been working with them on a lot of different events and test recipes and stuff like that. So trying to like really bring our story and our personal journey to life in the tap room so that it does feel like it's a familiar place, like you're hanging out with your friends, and like we're like blurring those lines between the people who are doing this just because it's a passion and hobby for them versus going to a place because it's this sort of like highbrow experience. We want to like be in the middle of that.
And people like spaces that are welcoming and have that sense of familiarity. I know, I was growing up, I lived in a small condo, then I lived in a bigger spot, and it was just a bigger version of where I used to live. It felt exactly the same. We like having that sense of comfort. So in your tap room and at Hot Plate, how are you just setting the tone that our space is for everyone and making people feel welcome and kind of guiding them on their craft beer journey?
I mean, Mike can take most of this because he does work out front the most often, and I have zero taste when it comes to aesthetic and things looking nice. So he did a lot of the heavy lifting on how the place looks. But I mean, just by opening our doors and me being the brewer in the back, that's just that. Like, we didn't have to do anything besides that, and it took a hell of a lot of work to get there. But just by opening our doors every day, that says something.
Well, there were a lot of we talked about when we were still in the design phase of this process. And we talked a lot about taking the idea of inclusivity and moving beyond just the protected categories that everyone recognizes of like, gender identity, sexual orientation, people of color, stuff like that. But also understand that inclusivity also means people with disabilities and other types of issues when it comes to making sure everyone feels welcome. So it played out in a couple of different ways. There's a part of our bar that's intentionally lowered so that people who are wheelchair bound can actually literally sit at the bar if they choose, and they don't have to sit at a table. We keep the place a little bit more lit than you expect at night, so that people who are hard of seeing, or women by themselves, or women or non-binary folks who are by themselves will feel a little bit safer. There are even like little hooks for people's purses at the bar, which, Sarah always picked up on whenever we'd go out somewhere. And one of the things that we get a lot of our, female and other customers who comment on that is a move that makes them feel like, wow, you thought about my experience of having this person being here and needing a place to put it. So I think that helps. We keep our music a little bit lower than you would expect as well, because, you know, when Sarah was working on the side at a craft beer bar in Brooklyn, her boss was both sight impaired and hard of hearing. And so during COVID, when everyone's wearing masks and she can't read lips and she can't really hear, we realized how difficult that was for folks. So there were certain things that were not necessarily aesthetic. They were sort of functional in nature. But then, like I said, having like living room furniture, having some decor pieces that were very personal, very like, you know, there's a poster of a Eugene Merman comedy show that we saw years ago, and just putting that up in the tap room, like things that were part of our own life, I think helped show that we were trying to just authentically welcome you into a space that, you know, we designed and we created, but we want you to be a part of this. And I think that just helped create that feel. And then the last thing was when it came to getting our license, we were really committed to having a pub brewer's license in Massachusetts, because that allowed us to have gluten-free alternative beverages, so that the brewery experience is not just about beer. It's also, like Sarah mentioned, just that communal aspect. But if you have a gluten intolerance, or for whatever you don't want to have beer, you still have something that we can serve you, and you don't avoid our place just because you're not a beer person.
And Sarah, you know, how do you go from the brew house and make your beers approachable to everyone? Like, how does this play into the equation?
It's definitely a balance. I always say if I made everything only I like to drink, we wouldn't be in business. And also, if we just chased trends, we also wouldn't be in business. So it's taking something like the blonde ale. What can I add to this? What's something that I enjoy? Let me give it a whirl. If it's terrible, if it tastes like soap to someone, then maybe let's not go down that route. But because there are so many stories in beer, and we as a culture are so exposed to so much advertising. So we're told to drink this type of beer because it does this, or that type of beer. So let's re-educate everyone about what beer actually is. And that goes into getting our ingredients, conservation, you know, how expensive it is to actually brew a New England IPA versus, you know, a light lager. And just understanding those things and talking to people about them. You know, we don't have 12 taps of New England IPAs because they're expensive to make, but we have this one, you know, and part of our small batch series that we're releasing this week. So I did 10 different small batches. Half of them were, again, I just wanted to throw bergamot in a beer. Let's find out what it is. But others were, okay, Rogan beer. That is not a style that you often see, but it seems cool. I love the ingredients with it. So let's see what that feedback is, you know, and then, okay, if I'm not going directly to style, how do I make it my own? Can it be with a local grain? Can it be with a local ingredient? So sometimes I want to do everything experimental, and Mike has to remind me that we do need to just serve beer, you know, beer flavored beer sometimes. But it is a balance in trying to understand, you know, kind of what makes me happy, and then listening to the consumers.
When we were getting ready to open, one of the things that we started talking about was, well, we did two things. One was we started doing some like light market research here, where we started what we called a growler share program. And we literally had like people in the area just like sign up and drop off a growler at our house. And we would give them the homebrew beer that we made off of our kegerator. And all we asked in exchange was that they fill out a Survey Monkey with a bunch of questions that Sarah had written, so that we could understand, okay, the local audience here, what do we think the different beers we want to make, how are they performing with just a handful of folks, which, you know, isn't statistically relevant, but when you have no money to spend, it's the best market research you can do. And so we started formulating a strategy where, okay, we have 12 taps, let's divide it in thirds. So 4 taps are going to be dedicated to classics and, you know, European traditional styles. 4 are going to be more crowd pleaser type of styles, and then 4 are going to be seasonal and experimental in nature. And that helped us feel like we had the greatest opportunity to cover the most amount of ground with the beers we were making. So within that, there's obviously some wiggle room of like, okay, well, is that crowd pleaser a New England IPA or like Imperial Stout or something? But just having that sort of like framework allowed us to make sure that if we're testing our lineup at any given time, is it still checking out? Make sure that we're testing as many different, or we're serving as many different types of consumers. You know, we both have backgrounds in marketing. You know, I was on the creative side, Sarah was more on the strategy and research side. But we have a deck where we like actually list out like, here are all the consumer groups that we think we can reach, and here are the ones that we're going to prioritize based on what's working and what's not working, and let's make sure we have beers that serve these different, you know, customer segments. And so it's just applying kind of what we learned in our professional background to an industry where, you know, I think during the boom, it's like hanging your shingle and having a New England IPA could get you most of the way there. Now that like it's getting to be a little bit more of a competitive landscape, how can we make sure that we establish a brand that is trying to reach as many people as possible, and then have specific styles that within that umbrella can appeal to a wider range of people? And one specific example that I've been very surprised by and happy with is our cream ale has cut across so many different demographics. We put it on early days because we didn't have time to lager before we opened, and it has literally stayed on, you know, the entire time we've been open. And we just started distributing a couple of months ago, and it's been one of our best-selling cans in this area, because what we found was we're actually doing some market share from like macro beer drinkers because it's a light beer made locally, and that's appealing to people, especially, you know, with all the madness going on around Bud Light. It's like that light beer drinker is now kind of like up for grabs. And if you're like, hey, this is made in your own backyard and it's a super light beer, like, I think one of the things we're finding is our inclusivity, our mission of inclusivity has to now also start thinking about class, and it has to start thinking about income level. And, you know, you're making a premium product that's getting increasingly expensive, that further and further alienating people who don't have the means to buy your product. So if you can make a cream ale that's still relatively affordable, maybe you can get a consumer that would otherwise never step foot in a brewery because they're never going to spend like $10 on a beer. So just added a new dimension to what we're doing. And we didn't know that a year ago. We now know that, but getting that information and reacting to it just helps us make sure that we just continue to build a tap list that, like I said, just make sure we're appealing to a lot of different people. And just to hang on that thought for one more second, one of the things that's really cool about that one is we see that that specific beer appeals to a BIPOC consumer. It appeals to a blue collar consumer. It appeals to a boomer who never really got into craft beer. It appeals to some women who come in and say, I just want something light. And so one beer style that is in no way like a sexy hype beer has done really well for us with people that don't normally see themselves reflected in the craft beer industry. And that was not our capable of anything. That was not something that was super crazy. That was just a traditional American style that we just made as a stopgap until we could get a lager on tap. And, you know, and suddenly that became something that really worked for us.
No, I love that. And you, both of your, you know, love of data and feedback. I mean, it makes sense based off your journey, but it's so important. So like moving forward, you know, how are you currently asking your current guests and your the people in your community for feedback of what they're looking for so you can provide that ideal taproom experience?
I mean, it's one, just asking people, you know, if they're like, I don't know, give me whatever. I always start with what you don't like. Is there something you don't like? Because I feel like I can take out a lot of stuff rather than someone being like, I love, you know, this type of beer. Is like, well, what do you love about, you know, so what do you don't like? Tell me that. Again, Mike does most of the talking out front. What we're going to start doing, and it started with the small batch series, is once a quarter, kind of doing these small batch salons, inviting people to try out these different brews, whatever it is I come out with, and talking to them about it. And again, people come in and there's always the handful of people, I think you should do XYZ. I think you should do ABC. But marrying that with what we see in the trends and the Brewers Association reports, and just truly talking and watching people, because someone can say they don't like something, but if their friend gets a flight and they steal the stout out of it, saying they didn't like stouts, well, that's something to know.
I think that's the reality. Is one of the things we're trying to do a really good job with is, you know, anyone who's worked in a taproom knows you get, and really any consumer facing job, you get a ton of unsolicited advice from people all the time. You know, what you guys should really do, you know, you get that almost every single day. But like Sarah said, like, what are the sales saying? You know, and it's been really interesting to see the ebbs and flows of like what beers are performing well. And there are these weird streaky times where suddenly like one beer is going to like really catch on, or, you know, and I've seen it happen. This is a small enough community, especially in the non-tourism scene, where we try something, one person likes it, and then next thing you know, for a week straight, that's all people are ordering because like that person literally told everyone. And so
power of influence.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's both good and bad in some ways, because I think there confirmation bias as a result. So one of the things that we try to do is balance between what's working and what can we double down on, but how do we keep pushing ourselves to keep testing and learning so that we can keep trying different events. And we've tried stuff and it's worked. We've tried stuff and it hasn't worked. You know, we recently did a choir performance on Sunday, and I was not sure how that was going to go. For me, it was a pet project because one of my friends is the choir director, and the beer was inspired by this Polish novel that I really loved. I was dead set that this was going to work. And day of, I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea. And it ended up being like a really great and well-attended event. But like that could have gone the other way. And one of the things I'm trying to learn, and Sarah being the more disciplined, data-driven person, reminds me often is even when things quote unquote fail, if we can learn something from it and keep iterating, like then we're still doing what we're supposed to be doing. So I think what we see heading into year 2 now, like we were pretty lucky and we had a pretty good first year, but can we just keep taking risks? Can we keep taking bets and just do it in a way that as long as we have it almost like a controlled experiment, like what can we learn? What can we keep iterating on? But if we get complacent or we start doing the same old, then I feel like we're going to not be serving the community well. And so, you know, I think the bottom line is because we're in an area that's going through a period of revitalization, there's a lot of opportunity to serve a lot of different people in this organization, and letting them come to us sometimes. Like we're getting more and more people like, hey, can I host this party here? Can I have this meeting here? Can I do this? And it's always like, yes, please use this space for those purposes. You know, board nights. There was a little league meeting with parents. There's going to be like an Irish dancing fundraiser, like anything. This space is for the community. And the more we can get that out there, the more we'll find what groups, you know, really have that affinity for coming and using our space. And that will lead to that discovery of what can we keep doing.
It sounds like you're creating something special, and I wish you were a tad closer. I look forward to visiting someday. Yeah. So I was trying to visualize your space, and I looked at your Instagram, and I want to pull it up for a second because I absolutely love what I saw. Because so often you go to a brewery Instagram, and you just see beer, you know, maybe a few shots of taproom. But the thing that stands out to me when I'm looking at your Instagram, I see people. I see smiling faces. I mean, it takes me a second to even realize I'm looking at a brewery's Instagram right now. Why is it important for you all in Hot Plate to have all these different faces and show them and just to build what you're building for the community?
There's a 2-part answer to that. One is just my background as a content creator. You know that certain types of content, or one knows that certain types of content perform, and a familiar face works. And you had mentioned at the start of the call, Sarah's red glasses. One of the things that people have commented on is that Sarah's red glasses are her signature look. And that was unintentional. It's just that's what people started telling us. So now I'm like, okay, we need to buy up the rest of that stock so we never go out, you know, Sarah never has a different pair of glasses. But in all honesty, you know, it's like, on one hand, it's like, what do you do to break the scroll? And for most beer, as you said, most beer accounts don't realize, like, if you're somebody who likes craft beer and you follow a bunch of breweries like we do, a lot of, you know, we have thousands of breweries that we follow. If you're scrolling, beer looks identical on Instagram. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. It looks the same. One of the things so just from stop scroll and making sure that people recognize that it's Hot Plate content, that's important for us. The other thing is, you know, one of our core values and probably our primary value is this idea of community. And, you know, this idea of bringing people together. You hear so many people talk about, oh, beer brings people together. Sure, it does. But like, you need to show that. What does it actually mean? That's just an empty platitude unless you show, like, hey, we had this event, we had that event, you know, this person had this thing, this team member had this milestone. Like, celebrating those stories and the people that actually make this work. That's what building a community is actually like. That's why people come to your tap room and don't just go to a package store. And honestly, coming out of COVID, we all were isolated for 3 years. I think we all need a reminder of what it was like to be social and not just our little pods of like our 6 closest friends, but like that idea of a network of people. And so, you know, the more that we can celebrate those stories, and like we, you know, and that ties back to what we said overall of what we're trying to do is give people who don't normally care about beer a reason to like get excited about what we're doing. because not everyone's going to want to hear about Citra or Amarillo or whatever. They're going to maybe want to hear about these other stories that we have to tell about the people that make this place special.
Mike, we could end it with that because that's a really powerful thing you said. And I agree 100% because it's beer's the anchor of the industry, but it's all about the people sharing the stories and just building those relationships. I mean, that's why we're all here to get to know wonderful people over the shared love of beer or even other beverages sometimes, the shared love of beautiful spaces.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Sarah, for you, what's next? What's a goal of yours that we haven't dove into today?
Oh, I have so many. For me, I just automatically go to processes. It's like what New Year's resolutions. I'm like, I'm going to be better at production, things like that. I just would really like to be able to continue to produce beers that people comment on in a good way, obviously, but also just build my relationships in the industry. I don't come from an industry family tree. I didn't start at a brewery under so-and-so and be able to open my own shop. So understand more of the industry and actually being part of it and leaving that kind of imposter syndrome at the door. And also just really delving in. There's so many great things happening with the science of yeast and hops and all of that. So looking at that and knowing that I can't know everything and trying to bring people into my orbit that can teach me, but understanding how we can use that science to advance the beer, to maybe do something a little different, maybe conserve a little more water, conserve a little more beer. Where can we help? Because we're relying on environmental things. So just definitely getting more into the industry and more into the science of things.
No, it's been great meeting you all today. Now, one thing I'm curious about, because you two have known each other 20 plus years, right?
Yep.
And I enjoyed the anecdote you talked about when you were homebrewing together and how you just made it an activity. It was just something to do better than going out to dinner, having a drink together. It was something you could do together where you were engaged. What's it been like running a brewery together? Have you learned anything about each other that you didn't know prior?
I think everything we've known about each other and whether a flaw or a benefit just expand. I mean, we worked together in college. We also had our first professional jobs together. So we do know how to work in a business space. It's been nice that we can kind of work together again. I don't know. I think I learned his hate of bergamot for sure. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Mike can see a ton of things.
Well, I think one of the things that was interesting is like Sarah said, I don't think we learned anything about each other necessarily, but we saw that our dynamic in running our household kind of translated here. One specific example is like, I'm a very anxious person and I get very anxious about money. And so, I'm usually in charge of revenue driving activity, but we realize that if I'm too close to the numbers, I'm going to like spin out of control. That happens in our home life too. Like Sarah usually handles the finances and like we talk together about long-term financial, what will we do with it? But that's a conversation where we have together, but the day-to-day managing of money, like that's just something that makes me stressed out to the max. And so Sarah has stepped in and done that. And so I think the way we've divided the business is a lot of ways that we've done it our whole life. And so it's not necessarily that we learned something. It's just that we realized that like, we are who we are and we have to run this company playing to our respective strengths. And now that we actually have an actual company, it's not just the two of us, we can start to understand like, we hired a new team member a couple of weeks ago and like Matt brings a whole different vibe than the rest of the team. And you can start to understand like, okay, now that we're building a full team and it's the two of us, where are we deficient and who can we bring into the fold that can like fill into these different slots? But because we know ourselves so well, we already have a sense of like, okay, this is sort of a Sarah activity, this is sort of a Mike activity, and then the gaps like having an accountant, that was super important. So like we had to go find an accountant to handle that. So I think that is an advantage. And there were no aha moments, but it was clear, like I said in the outset, that I have no business being in the brew house on brew day. And that was a change from when we were homebrewing, because I would, give a hand when we were homebrewing. And for this, it was like, I was just way too anxious, way too flighty, and it was just better for me to just be out there.
After the fifth brew, I literally said, get out of my brew house. So.
No, I love how both of you know what you're good at, and if it's something either of you are good at, you find someone who is to bring on the team. What advice would you give for other couples running businesses together?
Oh boy.
I think honestly, being unafraid to be honest. One of the things, and again, this is something that Sarah and I had as just a couple, but it's even harder and it's, I think, even more intense when you're running a business together. Now your whole livelihood is riding on what you're building together. If you're going to be like, oh, I don't want to say this because that's going to like hurt their feelings or something, that's just going to fester. Like we are really open and honest, and like we will have very uncomfortable discussions, but it's better to get it out there so that you can like deal with it versus like, oh, I'll just bite my tongue. And then, because there have been moments where it's like something goes wrong and one of us will be like, oh, like I knew that was going to get fucked up or something. And it's just like, well, then why didn't you say something? So it's like, just say it. And you have to understand that, and this was advice we got and we didn't listen to it first. You also have to understand that when you go home, you sort of hang up cleats at the door and like you have to go back to being like your home selves. And we had a hard time with that the first 6-9 months of just like,
we still do.
I would say we got better at it, but like the first several months, it was like possible to separate because it was so new, it was so overwhelming. And now we're getting back to like making sure we have like a date night or we, spend some time together.
How do you disconnect? Like, what's the secret there? Like, what do you do to put work off the mind, put your phones down, get off the computer? Like, what's working?
I mean, I do not like being on the computer. I do not like being on the phone. So it is very easy for me to put it to the side. Like I left my phone at the brewery night, got home and I was like, I guess it's there. And it was the best night to not even have to worry about it. And so it's actually really easy for me. I think the part I can't turn off because I do enjoy it so much is if I have a beer and I'm like, fuck, this is just so good. I want to make this. And, we're trying to watch a movie or we're just trying to watch some trash TV. I can't stop. I'm like, I want to know what's in it. I want to know the process. I want to know everything. And that's just the way my mind works.
I'm way more screen addicted. So I'm way more guilty of like never putting down the phone and do our socials. So like, I'll always like defend myself and be like, well, I have to, this is my job. But the one thing that I didn't do a good job with in the early days that I got back to is making sure I make an hour a day to write. And I'm an old fashioned person where I write hand. So I had to learn, and I started doing this a couple of months ago and I've stuck with it. Like I keep my phone out of the office. I put it on do not disturb and I set a timer for an hour. So I'm literally just notebook and pen in the office, and getting that back into my life helped ground me to like, this is sort of the Mike that has existed before Hot Plate and will continue to exist for the rest of my life. And if I don't give myself an hour a day for that, then I'm going to find every excuse in the world to like never stop working, because we don't have children. So it's like, there's no other reason to like stop working. So we had to start building time back in for the things that are us outside of the business. That's probably the biggest advice, whether it's, activities as a couple or individually. It's so easy to get swept up into all of this because no one's going to call you out. They're like, yeah, that's what's running a small business. Look at how hard that person's working. It's so admirable, but you lose yourself. And, we went through a period where we lost ourselves, and, year 2, it's like, this week is not a good example because we've had 10 straight days of programming. So like, this is a bad time, but in general, trying to go into this understanding we're not going to solve everything in any given day. Can we actually just make sure that we still have time to unplug, or we're going to get burnt out? And it's an important part of the process.
I love all that. I mean, you have to be so intentional in your personal lives and your work lives and everything in between. And I feel like I'm a weird mix of both of you. And I look forward to the first pint we get to have together, whenever that may be. But I've got one final question. Sure. I'm curious, and I bet some other people might be as well. So for anyone dealing with condo code violations and interested in getting started homebrewing, any tips for finding the perfect hot plate?
Don't brew on a hot plate. Even like I said, we upgraded to like an induction one. And I was doing an experiment with Pulque last November. And I was like, oh, I'll bring out the old upgraded hot plate. And I remember I was just like, why did I do this? It was so triggering. It took an hour for 2 gallons to not even boil. I had 3 beers in that time. And I was like, oh, this is why I would drink so much, because I was just sitting there waiting. So don't get a hot plate.
Well, I think
don't cook risotto on it. But like when we were starting, there weren't as many cool systems as there are now. There wasn't the grain, there probably was, but there are affordable solutions now that are kind of all in one, that if you live in 600 square feet and don't want brewing stuff to become your furniture, you can do it very affordably and very easily now with a lot of the stuff that's out there.
I mean, you kind of liked when we were working from home and our kegerator was next to our couch.
Oh, that was perfect. Yeah. Well, that was the made product. I can just reach over and get that,
I think for the hot plate specifically, if you have to get one, go with the like 220 volt one and not the like 240 volt, whatever. Like, we had to use just the normal 120, and like even if you get a good one, like Sarah mentioned, it's still a pain. The ones I think that whatever it is, 220 or 240 volts, I think those are used in some restaurants because they are a little more high powered. But as Sarah said, do everything you can to avoid needing a hot plate.
I love that. So this has been a great conversation with you both. If anyone is interested in learning more about Hot Plate Brewing or just following you, where can they do so?
We're on Instagram at Hot Plate Beer. We also are on Facebook at facebook.com/Hot Plate Brewing, and our website is hotplatebeer.com. We're located in downtown Pittsfield. That's in Berkshire County, which is in western Massachusetts.
Awesome. Well, Mike and Sarah, this has been a blast. I really do look forward to that first beer together, and I'll see you before too long. Thanks again, and good luck. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.